couple of guys named Ed and Fred go fishing for the very first time in their life. Buy themselves a couple of rods and reels, rent a boat at the lake, row out to what seemed like a good place. They drop their anchor, they bait their hooks and cast their lines. After a few practice casts, they settle into catching fish. And boy, do they catch fish. Every time their line hits the water, a fish hits the line. It starts getting dark and they need to get the boat back to the rental place. They catch so many fish that they decide, hey, we're going to come back. Fred starts hauling in the anchor and turns around to see Ed pull out a jackknife and carve an X in the bottom of the boat. Fred asks, what do you think you're doing? Ed replies, I'm marking the spot so we can find it again. Oh, don't be so stupid, Ed, Fred replied. That won't do any good. Next time we come, we'll probably get a different boat. All right, let's put that one down to the pile. All right. So fishing can be a fun and very relaxing pastime. I don't need rods or reels. I just like to sit and watch the sunshine. But there are a lot of people that take this pastime to a higher level. Some guys spend thousands of dollars on rods and reels and compete in different competitions, fishing competitions. They're such a big deal, men have risked jail by cheating to win a tournament. Some competitions offer over $1 million in cash and prizes. And the folks who fish in those spend serious money on their equipment. A professional fishing rod costs over $1,000. A reel more than $3,000. And the boats, $75,000 and up. And then you got to start talking about the sonar and the radar and the LiDAR and the Ader over there dar. The funny thing is, those guys don't even get to keep the fish. Peter, James, and John. These guys were not sports fishermen. They didn't catch and release. They caught fish for a living. It wasn't a pastime to them, it was their livelihood. Luke writes that they'd been fishing all day, hadn't caught a thing. They were tired, they were frustrated. They wanted to put their nets up for the day. There was no use going out to fish now. The day was too hot and the fish would seek deeper water where the nets wouldn't reach. So Peter, James, and John beached the boats. They began to dry their nets. It's a long, tedious work, but it had to be done so they'd be ready to go the next day. Then along came Jesus. Jesus was preaching. He was so popular that the crowd gathered around to hear him, and they were crowding him a little bit as he neared the lake. Jesus climbs up into Peter's boat. There's a place to teach from without being crowded. Now, Jesus just stepping into a strange fisherman's boat may seem a bit presumptuous. But Jesus wasn't a stranger to Peter or the others. John 1, 40 through 42 says, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who had heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing that Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is, the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. So Peter knew Jesus. He'd already been personally introduced. Jesus was the one who started calling him Peter. Peter starts out as one of the crowd following Jesus, but not all the time. Peter hears a sermon one day and then heads back to the boats the next. Peter shows up often enough, though, that Jesus knows him, recognizes him, considers him a friend. And then after a long and fruitless day of fishing, Jesus steps into Peter's boat. Peter did not have an X in the bottom of his boat from that day's effort. And Jesus asked Peter to push off from shore. Peter says, sure, it's a few feet offshore, no real work involved. So Peter throws his nets in the boat, puts out from shore, and for the next hour or so, Peter gets a front row seat to some of the finest preaching anybody's ever heard. Then the sermon is over. The crowd goes home. Peter's ready to call it a day. But Jesus isn't. Luke 5:4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Now Peter is a professional fisherman. Peter knows two things. This is the wrong time of day to fish, and this is the wrong part of the lake to fish. You can almost hear him wondering how much he really likes this Jesus guy. So Peter tries to reason with Jesus. You can just almost hear the tiredness in his voice. Master, we worked hard all night, haven't caught anything. And it's easy to imagine Peter looking hopefully at Jesus, hoping Jesus will acknowledge that Peter's the one who knows fishing and will rescind the request to drop the nets. But Jesus stands his ground. And Peter relents. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. Because Jesus is a friend, Peter keeps the rest to himself. What a waste of time and effort this is going to be. And with a shrug of resignation, Peter casts his nets over the side. And then, suddenly, the water begins to roil. As Peter draws in the net, it begins to strain. They caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. They had to call in the other boat to help pull in the catch. This had never happened before. They'd caught their share of fish in their day, but this kind of catch was unheard of. And they'd caught the fish in a place and a time they never should have gotten any at all. And Peter suddenly realizes this Jesus is no ordinary preacher. He'd heard the crowd shout to Jesus, you are the Son of God. His brother Andrew called him the Messiah. And suddenly, he realizes it's all true. It scares him. Luke 5:8 says, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. At this point, Jesus says to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll catch people. And Peter, James, and John left their boats behind to follow Jesus full time. What is the primary objective of a fisherman? It's to catch fish. The average fisherman can have thousands of dollars wrapped up in rods and reels. The commercial guys, hard telling how much those boats are worth. Fisherman can have the most beautiful boat on the lake. He can have the best lures and bait money can buy. He can have sonar, radar, and heat-seeking missiles. But if he doesn't catch fish, he's just spent a whole lot of money for nothing. The rods, the reels, the lures, the bait, the boat, they're all just tools. But if those tools don't help the fisherman catch fish, they're worthless. What is our primary objective as a church? It's to catch people for Jesus. We have a good building. A lot of time, thought, effort have gone into putting this building together in a way to make it useful, to meet our objective. Our objective as a church is not to build buildings. Our objective is to use our building as a tool to win souls for Jesus. And if our building doesn't help us accomplish that goal, it's worthless to us. We have Sunday school. Our objective as a church is not to do Sunday school. Our objective is to use Sunday school to teach us God's Word, so we can be prepared to teach people about Jesus and have answers to those who wonder about their faith. It's a tool. Our music teams do a great job of picking songs and leading us in worship. And our objective is not to be a bunch of great singers. Our objective is to be so involved in singing praise to Jesus that it creates excitement inside of us, and that excitement bleeds over into our daily lives and causes people to want the Jesus that we sing about. It's a tool. I could go on and on. The preaching, the communion, the offering, the clothing closet. We don't exist to do these things. We exist to bring people to Jesus. And those activities are the tools that we use to do it. Luke 19:10. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. We have been given a great privilege. The privilege of fishing with Jesus. The privilege of making a difference in him and with him. Jesus wants to go fishing with us. And so how does Jesus train us to fish? It seems to kind of be a gradual process. Jesus usually starts with people that want to be with him. If you're going fishing, would you want to have people in the boat that liked you? Wanted to be in the boat with you? Or would you prefer to have people there who didn't like you and didn't want you to be there? Fishing in a small boat is a really bad place to be with people you don't want to be with and who don't want to be with you. Now, Peter likes Jesus. He's been around him. He likes listening to him. That's why when Jesus got in his boat and asked Peter to take him a little away from shore, Peter wasn't offended. It's a small favor to a good friend. And now here you are. You're at church. I hope because you like Jesus. You like being around him. You like listening to the stories about him. You're the kind of people Jesus wants to go fishing with. So Jesus usually starts with people who like being around him. And then he gives you an opportunity to serve him. Peter was just cleaning nets to get ready for the next day when Jesus says, would you help me? All Peter has to do is row his boat off the shore and draw anchor. It wasn't a big job. Small favor to do for someone Peter likes. That's the beauty of the church. There's all kinds of small jobs that need to be done. Jobs where you can get your feet wet. Filling a communion trays, working with food distribution, in the clothing closet. Just cleaning, like we've got next weekend. You don't have to possess a particular set of skills. You don't have to have a PhD. You just have to think to yourself, I'm doing this for Jesus. But Jesus doesn't stop there. Once he knows you love him enough to do the small things for him, he takes you out a little deeper. Gives you an opportunity to see if you trust him. Notice what Jesus asked Peter to do. Luke 5:4 says, put out in deeper water and let down your nets for a catch. Now this is more than a small favor for a friend. Not necessarily hard, but cleaning the nets, again, will require some time. And it doesn't make any sense. This shouldn't work. There shouldn't be any fish in that water that time of day. Peter might have even been worried that some of his friends on shore would make fun of him. It would have been embarrassing to come back and have to explain why he listened to some first-time fisherman and got his nets all wet for nothing. In the same way, Jesus, at some point, is going to be asking you to put out a little deeper in your faith. Put down your nets and talk to somebody about Jesus. It won't be physically demanding, but it takes your time. All you have to do is tell someone what Jesus means to you. But somewhere, deep inside, you're going to be tempted to say, this won't work. They won't listen to me. I've got nothing to say. They'll ask me something I don't know the answer to. And when you're tempted to listen to that voice, remember this. When Peter let down his nets into the water, was it his skill that got the fish in the nets? Was it his years of experience and expertise that made the difference in what he caught? No. All Peter did was obey Jesus, and Jesus filled the nets. Jesus isn't concerned about how many fish you catch, as he is with the fact you just simply lowered your net and shared your faith just to please him, because he said so. Jesus isn't looking for a huge catch. He's looking for huge obedience. Fishermen caught a whole mess of bluegill and perch. When he brought it back to his boat on the dock, there was one of his friends with a huge 4-foot-long fish that he'd caught. Man looks at his friend and says, "You only caught one?" It may be you'll only catch one person for Jesus, but for that one person, you'll have made the difference in eternity. Andrew was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. The scripture only mentions one person he led to Jesus, and that's Peter. In the same way, in the book of Acts, we read only just a few verses about a man named Ananias. He only shows up once in all the Bible. And yet Ananias led one man to Jesus, Saul. The man we know better as Paul, who wrote half your New Testament. Those men, as far as we know, lowered their nets and only caught one soul for Jesus. But those that they caught have made a great deal of difference in our faith. I'm going to close with a story told by Max Lucado. He said, "His hands are twisted, his feet are useless. He can't bathe himself, he can't feed himself, he can't brush his teeth, comb his hair, put on his underwear. His shirts are held together by strips of Velcro. His speech drags like a worn-out audio cassette. Robert has cerebral palsy. The disease keeps him from driving a car or riding a bike, going for a walk. But it didn't keep him from graduating from high school or attending Abilene Christian University, from which he graduated with a degree in Latin. Having cerebral palsy didn't keep him from teaching at St. Louis Junior College and from venturing overseas on 5 mission trips. And Robert's disease didn't prevent him from becoming a missionary in Portugal. He moved to Lisbon alone in 1972. He rented a hotel room and began studying Portuguese. Found a restaurant owner who would feed him after the rush hour and a tutor who would instruct him in the language. Then he stationed himself daily in a park where he distributed brochures about Christ. Within 6 years, he led 70 people to the Lord, one of whom was his wife, Rosa. Now, my point in sharing this story with you is not to intimidate you or embarrass you. My point is simply that Robert Reed was driven to share his love for Jesus. And he used whatever tools he had at his disposal so he could witness. He couldn't speak well, but he could pass out tracts. If you want tracts, we'll get you tracts. You could simply invite someone to church. Just let down your nets. Go fishing with Jesus because you know that's what matters the most to him.